Welcome back, Thune Nation. This is the AnythingOU Podcast on the Chris and Drew Show. I'm your host, Christian Williams. I got my man, Drew England. Drew, how you doing?
Hey, man, I'm good. Like I always say, it's a great day to be a Sooner. Excited about this episode. So, yeah.
For sure. This is a good one. Thune Nation, we would like to proudly announce, we announced on Twitter and over social media, but we are now a proud sponsor from Horns Down Shop. They cover a bunch of athletes and they cover OU. If you ever want to support your boy, Deshaun White, we had him on the podcast. If you ever want to support him monetarily through NILs, you can do so by buying his merch. We're also in the process of maybe trying to get some stuff in the works. And we would appreciate if you go to give them a follow on Twitter. The links will be in the description as always, as well as to their Horns Down OU. We would really appreciate if you guys would go stop by and check them out. And if you don't buy anything, at least drop them a follow. They'll be posting stuff about us all the time. Very, very cool stuff happening over there. So we would appreciate it. Hey, and go get you a Deshaun White signed football helmet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's get in the video. Welcome back, Thune Nation. This is the AnythingOU Podcast on the Chris and Drew Show. We have a very special guest, Parker Thune. He is a 247 guy, talks about recruiting on the ref, 94.7 on the radio. And Parker, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. Pleasure to be here.
For sure. So Parker, I'm going to jump right into these questions, man. Give us kind of a little backstory as far as you want to go into it. Kind of, how did you end up at OU? And how did you end up in all things recruiting for 247 on the radio?
Yeah, that's a great question. My journey to the recruiting realm was not one that was planned or that I was necessarily aspiring to. I got my undergrad degree in broadcast journalism, really saw myself in the long run as more of a TV guy, but was offered the opportunity to work with SI Sooners and John Hoover over there in March of 2020. So it's been almost 2 full years now since I was offered that position as his deputy editor. And when I jumped in, it was almost exactly concurrent with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic that shut down the sports world as we knew it for several months. And so at that time, the only thing that was really going on was recruiting. And so because that was about all I had to cover, that's what I really concentrated on covering, and got the chance to go see Caleb Williams at the Elite 11 in the summer of 2020, a couple of days before he committed to OU, tracked the progress of Oklahoma's class over the next few months, as Caleb kind of helped Lincoln Riley and the Sooner staff at that time recruit the remainder of the class around him. And then I jumped on with 24/7, had the opportunity to join their team on National Signing Day of 2020. That was the first day I ever worked for them. Oh, I'm sorry. I just got a text and I got distracted there, but
all's good.
That's the thing about the working in the recruiting landscape too, man, is that you're getting hit up constantly and it's just an endless cycle of communication. So apologies for that momentary lapse, but no, after I jumped on with them in December 2020, that's really when I got to focus on recruiting on full-time capacity because of course, at SI, I was doing recruiting coverage, but once the football season rolled around, I was doing a lot of day-to-day team coverage as well. But when I jumped on with 24/7, my role very much became recruiting centric. And so that became my avenue. That's what I dug into and have been digging into ever since. Jumped on with KREF and their team of outstanding radio hosts in August of 2021 to co-host their midday show alongside Mike Steely from 12 to 2. And then in the new year here in 2022, right when January begun, got the opportunity to add an additional hour of radio with Tyler McComas in the 2 to 3 slot where we just talk Oklahoma recruiting. So, yeah, that's been fun. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. Not a busy guy at all, right?
Oh, man, if only people knew.
How excited are you for Brent Venables and this hire, and then just the staff that he's put together, because I know that all you've known basically is Lincoln Riley and that regime and everything like that since you've been at OU, and so now it's kind of turning over a new in a transition and something like that. But obviously you've heard the stories and everything like that from his time previous at OU, and then now he's back as the head man. How excited you are, and then the staff just that he's put together.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a different flavor. And the new era of OU football is going to have a stark contrast to the previous regime. And I think the one thing to be really excited about with Brent Venables and the staff he's assembled is that they're all very high character individuals. And of course, Brent Venables' calling card over the years has been his integrity. You saw that in the way that he departed Clemson. You saw a microcosm of it in the recruitment of Jaron Kanak and how that all unfolded. But man, he got a budding superstar in the recruiting realm and potentially as a positional coach as well in Miguel Chavis. Obviously, we haven't gotten the opportunity to see what he can do as a coach, but we've certainly seen what he can do as a recruiter. Todd Bates is obviously one of the more well-respected defensive line coaches in the nation. And then you're surrounded as well with a core of guys that all have OU DNA through and through. A couple guys that started out their coaching careers as student assistants at OU, and Brandon Hall and Jeff Levy, alumni and very well-respected alumni that played football at OU, and Cale Gundy and Joe John Finley and DeMarco Murray. And then, of course, you convinced Jay Valai to make a lateral move from Alabama, a program that's won 6 national titles in the last 13 seasons. That says a lot for what Brent Venables has been able to sell in terms of his vision for the program, not just to his players, not just to his recruits, but to the coaches that he assembled his staff with. And so I do think that – oh, nope, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just going to say the first time I really got to hear, Coach Chavis in an interview was a couple days ago with, Gail Chavis. I think, seeing his first full interview as a true position coach and just the way he carries himself and the way he kind of captivates a room was just, for me, I was like, wow, he's got my full attention. So that was fun to watch. And, for a guy like Joe John Finley to come after him and say, hey, wow, how about Miguel Chavis? That's a pretty incredible guy. So I'm excited for him.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of excitement about what this new staff brings to the table, and the excitement isn't specific to Brent Venables. Obviously, you look at Jeff Levy as a guy that has emerged over the past couple of years as one of the more exciting young offensive coordinators in the collegiate game. And with him now potentially having more talent than he's ever had at his disposal at the University of Oklahoma immediately in 2022, he'll certainly have more talent than he's ever had at his disposal by 2024, 2025. But even right now in 2022, you can make the case that Jeff Levy has more to work with in terms of playmaking talent than he had at UCF or Ole Miss or going back to the days at Baylor. So I think there is a lot of potential for this new Oklahoma offense under the direction of Jeff Levy, and with a guy in Dylan Gabriel at the controls that knows Levy, knows his system, and can execute.
For sure. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things that I'm excited about is kind of just seeing an offense and a coach that's not going to want to take his foot off the gas kind of thing. But it's also amazing that on the other side of the ball, we won't have to worry about people coming back, which is a really good thing to okay, we're going to be fine. What is something that stood out during the coaching search that you think people should know, or you found interesting that isn't already out there?
I mean, it's already out there because I've said it before, but man, I think it just bears repeating. We make jokes now about the day that Dabo Swinney was supposed to be OU's next head coach. And of course it's this big running joke, but the reality is the subterfuge regarding Dabo Swinney was something that was coming from very credible people and from people within the OU administration. And so as we were tracking this throughout the week, I had been told and I had reported on Monday of that week, just over 24 hours after Lincoln Riley had departed for USC, that Venables and Oklahoma had agreed in principle. And so to me, throughout that whole ordeal, that's kind of why I stuck to my guns throughout it all, that I believe Brent Venables was going to be the hire, because kind of had the intuition and had the sense in talking to people over the course of that week that Venables was going to be the guy. And I knew that the ball was in OU's court, that Venables was in if the job was his. And ultimately what ended up happening was OU just basically had to make that look like a process, or at least, be able to say that they did their due diligence, because, you go out and you interview one guy. Obviously, Brent Venables is the type of coach that's going to be at the top of anybody's list when you're talking about replacing a head coach, particularly at such a historic program as the University of Oklahoma. But you have to do due diligence in interviewing other top candidates, because it is a bad look if you go interview one guy and then announce him as head coach immediately. So Venables is the guy. He was the guy. He always was the guy throughout that whole process. But in the 4 or 5 days leading up to his official announcement as head coach, there was a lot of subterfuge, both internally and externally. I know I probably shouldn't say that. I'm going to refrain from saying what I wanted to say there. But I know for a fact that Dabo Swinney's name was being thrown around by people on the inside to try and distract from what was going on. And I don't really know why that is, because, like, you know, at the end of the day, I don't feel like you need to go to such lengths to disguise your motives. But I'm also not an athletic director. I've never conducted a coaching search. And so I'm certainly not questioning that there is a motive and a rationale for everything. And at the end of the day, Joe Castiglione got his guy. So far be it from me to question him or anybody that was involved in that whole process. But Dan Lanning was interviewed. Dan Lanning wanted the job badly. Dave Aranda was interviewed. I don't think Dave Aranda was ever going to leave Baylor, but especially with what he'd done at Baylor in that 2021 season, that was one of the guys that you just kind of had to interview, you know. But I don't think it was any secret, and I think most everyone was in agreement from the get-go that Brent Venables was the best fit for the University of Oklahoma. And in getting Brent Venables, the Sooners were going to get what they thought they'd gotten in Lincoln Riley, which is a very well-respected coach who had never been a head coach before, but had demonstrated a lot of prowess as a coordinator, but moreover, a guy that was a lifer, because everybody thought Lincoln Riley was an OU lifer until he wasn't. Right? But with Brent Venables, you know he's not about to jump ship for another job. You know that Oklahoma is his destination. That's the reason why he's turned down head coaching jobs at less prestigious institutions over the years, because with the money he was making at Clemson and the success they were having, it didn't make sense to take a head coaching job somewhere else and risk your reputation as a coach on having to rebuild a program that was in shambles to a certain degree when you had it made, making multiple $1 million a year for a program that was in the national title hunt every year. Only for a job like Oklahoma did Brent Venables move from Clemson's defensive coordinator slot make sense.
Yeah, and I think the only serious job that he kind of considered, but then kind of pushed away, was the Auburn job the year before. And I think he was like, you know what? I have it good at Clemson. I'm not one of the highest paid coordinators in the country. I've won 2 national championships. We got a great culture here. I'm going to wait for the right opportunity, and bam, you know, who knew that it was going to be Oklahoma at the end of the day? And, you know, we're grateful that he's here. So it wouldn't be right not to discuss recruiting with Parker Thune. So we're going to jump into a little recruiting talk. How did we end up with the 8th best recruiting class in 22, and how was this staff able to build it in such a short time with those, you know, high school guys, and then obviously the transfer portal?
Man, that's a miracle of all miracles, isn't it? That in the midst of a coaching transition, you end up with a top 10 recruiting class nationwide. That's virtually unprecedented, what Oklahoma did. And you look at programs that had similar periods of transition in the likes of Miami and Florida, for instance. They didn't sniff the recruiting class that Oklahoma was able to put together. And here's what it speaks to more than anything else. The influence and the impact of Brent Venables, first and foremost, but also the impact of a guy in Miguel Chavis, who showed up to Oklahoma on December 9th, had 0 commits in his position group, and less than 2 months later on National Signing Day, inked 3 guys at the edge or defensive end position, all of whom he served as the primary recruiter for. So that spoke volumes for Miguel Chavis. And in terms of keeping the guys that were committed, still committed, and obviously you knew you were going to lose Rayleigh Brown. You had a pretty good indication that you were going to lose a guy like Demetrius Hunter. Kobe McKenzie, that situation was bizarre, and that's a whole nother can of worms. But as long as Brent Venables was straight up with him, and as long as Brent Venables clearly communicated that OU's still the place to be, Kobe McKenzie was going to end up back at OU, and he did. But I think in the meantime, the guys you don't talk about right? The guys like Kip Lewis and Caden Helms that were key pieces in this recruiting class, but maybe weren't as ballyhooed as a guy like Rayleigh Brown. Getting those guys to stick at Oklahoma was a testament to the efforts and the identity of guys that played football at the University of Oklahoma and were not about to watch that recruiting class go down in flames if they could do anything about it. And that included DeMarco Murray. That included Joe John Finley. Cale Gundy was instrumental. And of course, you have to throw in Bob Stoops, because without him, I don't think Oklahoma would have signed a top 10 class. It still would have been good, but Bob Stoops was the glue that held it all together during that week that Oklahoma was without a head coach. So many people were involved in the effort to keep the class together and then to add the respective cherries on top at the end of the recruiting cycle. It's not really a credit to one individual. What it is a credit to is the Oklahoma football program and the reality that you had so many people that in the aftermath of a rather unceremonious and completely unforeseen departure from the man at the top of the food chain within the OU football program, all of those people combined and engaged in a collaborative effort to make sure that this wasn't going to leave the program in shambles for years to come. It might be a couple weeks of rocky road. It might be a few more days of rocky terrain, but at the end of it all, Oklahoma was going to be in as good of a place, if not a better place, than it was before Lincoln Riley showed up to the offices on Sunday morning and told everybody peace out.
Yeah. How many programs can say they had Bob Stoops in their back pocket, and that kind of transition was, I mean, nowhere else could you have found that at that time, to stabilize, what was, a sink ship, as so to speak. Now, for us, we believed it once he took the reins and was like, hey, we're Oklahoma, we're going to make this happen. And for us to come out with that and, being able to hit the transfer portal and get a guy like Dylan Gabriel and a couple other, Jeffrey Johnson and stuff like that, that was huge. So, I still don't know how we did it. I think about that a lot, 8th best recruiting class with a couple of weeks to go in signing day. So.
One of the things I did want to ask you was some of the big names that came this weekend. Who do you think, without obviously what you can and can't say, who do you think is a lock, so to speak? And also, who are you most excited for out of the people that we are looking to recruit and for this football team coming up?
Yeah, well, I think you got to start that conversation with the guy that I have a crystal ball prediction in for, which is 4-star offensive lineman Caden Green out of Lee's Summit, Missouri. Now, he grew up in the Tulsa area, would have gone to Tulsa Union if his family hadn't moved, and he grew up rooting for the Sooners. So from the get-go, when Oklahoma offered, I had a pretty good inclination that the Sooners, at the very least, were going to be a real heavy hitter in his recruitment. And he's now been on campus 4 times since he received the offer. So this is the type of thing where Oklahoma has positioned themselves very well with a kid that they really didn't have any excuse not to position themselves very well with. To me, Oklahoma always had the leg up in Caden Green's recruitment, and they've done an outstanding job. Bill Biedenbow has been huge. The family loves Brent Venables, loves the environment at Oklahoma, and Michigan and Baylor are still very much in contention here. Miami and Missouri are probably going to get official visits from Caden Green as well. But Oklahoma's in the driver's seat and has been. And to me, unless something goes awry, I do think OU's in the best position to eventually get that commitment from Green. As you look at the visitors this weekend as a whole, the name that probably stands out is Richard Young, right? The 5-star running back out of the state of Florida. And I am very much in see it to believe it type of territory with Richard Young. Now, he's been to campus twice on his own dime. That's all fine and well. I got to see him book an official to OU before I start to seriously tout Oklahoma as a contender in the race for his commitment. OU made a really strong impression this past weekend on Miles McVay, the 4-star offensive lineman out of East St. Louis, as was reported by our 24/7 sports director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong. McVay is now planning on taking an official to Oklahoma. Another 4-star guy, PJ Adebawore, the edge rusher out of North Kansas City. He's going to follow up with an official to OU as well. And so on the whole, as you look at what this junior day brought for Oklahoma, I think the expectation in a lot of people's minds was that you were going to get some commitments, right? You were at least going to get one. And then when you didn't get any, most folks kind of viewed that as a disappointment. But in reality, I think there are two impressions that stand out the most in the recruiting landscape, right? The first impression and the last impression. And this was the first weekend visit opportunity in this 2023 cycle, because we'd been in a dead period since the conclusion of the 2022 cycle. And so Oklahoma got the chance to make the first impression on those 30-something guys that were there this past weekend. And so that visit weekend was always more about momentum than it was about commitments. And that's why I really didn't expect Oklahoma to get more than one commitment, if I'm being honest. I was a little surprised that they didn't get any, just because generally when you host that many players, at least one pops. You generally can go 1 for 30. But I think that also speaks to the new philosophy that Brent Venables and his staff are employing, which is to say, if you're committing to Oklahoma, you're done taking visits. You're not visiting anywhere else. So I understand why some kids might not have been as eager to commit to Oklahoma in March, knowing that they wouldn't be able to take any more visits thereafter if they wanted to lock down their spot at OU. So again, a lot of people are going to look at this past weekend of visits as something of a disappointment, if not an abject disappointment. I really do think, based on what I've heard, it was overall a net positive. I would say a net very positive when you talk about the momentum that OU was able to accrue with some of these elite targets in the 2023 class and the 2024 class.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I think a lot of this too was just being able to get these guys in, meet them, start building those relationships that we did with the 2022 kids in such a short amount of time, and really start cultivating that what staff does the best. And I think it could end up being, very, very good for us in the future. And I think a lot of people are excited about that, just because what we have collectively as a staff, so much, experience and guys that have recruited high caliber type of talent. So.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of the big names, like you mentioned, obviously we'd love to see DeMarco go out and get young, but I agree with you 100%. And I agree with you on most of the things that you talk about. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's always encouraging.
Well,
it'd be really cool to see that running back room get a little bit stronger, because I would love to see DeMarco be able to go get somebody of his caliber when he was younger, and then develop him to this NFL running back of like, oh my goodness, so it'd be cool to see.
Yeah. Well, that guy's going to be Javonte Barnes. You can book that. Javonte Barnes is going to be a superstar at the University of Oklahoma. And for my money, he was the best running back in that 2022 cycle. I think you will see him contribute very significantly as a true freshman. And ultimately, his ceiling at OU, if he sticks around all 4 years and he's a significant portion of that backfield picture for 4 years, I think he has an opportunity to leave OU as the program's all-time leading rusher.
So one last thing before we let Parker go, we're going to discuss a little spring football. I know a lot of Sooner fans are just anxious to get to April 23rd. It just got announced here, actually today when we're recording this. So April 23rd, 3 p.m. So it's going to be a big time. So what are you most excited about for spring ball, and who are the guys are you excited to see in this new system offensively and defensively?
Well, I think what I'm most pumped about is to see how many fans show up to the spring game, because I think my money is on this being the best attended spring game of all time at Oklahoma for obvious reasons. Everybody's so excited about the new direction of this program under Brent Venables, and they're going to get their first taste of what BV football looks like on April 23rd. And so I think it's going to be super interesting to just see the atmosphere of Owen Field for something as insignificant in the grand scheme as an exhibition, because I do think it has the chance not only to be a real unifying experience for a lot of Sooner fans around their new head coach, but it also has a chance to build a lot of momentum for this program in terms of public interest heading into the fall. And I think there's already a lot of momentum in that capacity, but a spring game can only compound that. As far as the guys that I'm most excited to see, the easy answer is Dylan Gabriel. right? I mean, the new quarterback, sixth new starting quarterback in the last 6 seasons for Oklahoma, the transfer, he's drawn the Baker Mayfield comparisons. He's the first lefty quarterback at Oklahoma since, well, Kendall Thompson technically, but in reality, you probably don't count that technicality and you're going back to the Josh Heupel days. But so yeah, Dylan Gabriel's the easy answer, but I do think it's going to be fun to see him operate in Jeff Lebby's scheme here at Oklahoma and kind of see what that dynamic resembles offensively. A couple of guys that I would say on either side of the ball, I am super excited to watch in particular. I am very high on Ethan Downs going into next season. And I know everybody's pumped for Danny Stutzman, but the Winter Soldier to Captain America, or is it the other way around? I'm not sure. Ethan Downs is going to be every bit as impactful for Oklahoma's football program in the year 2022 as Danny Stutzman. Make no mistake about that. I'm on record predicting that Ethan Downs is going to be an all Big 12 player. And I 100% believe that. This dude is going to be a monster as he moves into a full-time starting role for Oklahoma. So that is probably the guy I am most excited to watch. Obviously, we hear all the buzz for Jaron Kanak. It's going to be super intriguing to see how immediately he can crack the field and where his ultimate fit is in Brent Venables' defense. You'd have to imagine it's kind of that hybrid linebacker nickel type of role that you saw Isaiah Simmons occupy at Clemson under Venables. I think Robert Spears Jennings has the opportunity to push for playing time at safety. I love his physique and the way that he plays the game. And I also think Jonah Laulu is going to be a very intriguing case study because the plan is for Oklahoma to play him at defensive end, have his hand in the dirt, and essentially occupy the role that Isaiah Thomas had last year at OU. The only difference is Jonah Laulu is 6'6", 280 pounds. He's going to be one of the most physically imposing defensive ends in the entire nation. And you have that guy coming off the edge opposite the likes of Marcus Stripling or Clayton Smith or Ethan Downs, however it all shakes out. And you're going to see multiple fronts in Brent Venables' defense. It'll never be the same look. But I do think Jonah Laulu and Ethan Downs are two guys that are going to see a lot of snaps and will make a huge impact for this team on the defensive side. As I look at the offense, everything I keep hearing indicates that there are two freshmen that are going to play and could play quite a bit. That would be Javonte Barnes and Caden Helms. Those two guys have really, really impressed thus far in winter workouts. Caden Helms is already probably the most athletic tight end in that particular position group at Oklahoma. I think Javonte Barnes could make a push to start at running back, and I would probably put money on Eric Gray if you made me, but I do think Javonte Barnes is going to be a factor in a very immediate sense in that backfield picture. And then I think with what Jalil Farouk did in the bowl game, that's a guy that a lot of people are excited to see in a more significant capacity and a more significant role in this offense. Now, you get Theo Weiss back. I think that's an intriguing case in and of itself as well, because Weiss coming off a season in which he led the team in receptions and was crucial on third down in particular, misses the whole year with that foot injury. And so I think seeing what kind of juice he has coming off of an injury that cost him a full season is going to be interesting. And I wonder if there ends up being a bit of a positional battle at wide receiver between Weiss, Mims, Drake Stoops, and Jalil Farouk, because you're only going to have 3 starting wideouts, right? And so one of those guys is going to be the odd man out. And they'll still see snaps. They'll still see plenty of playing time. Brian Darby and Trayvon West are 2 other guys that I think are going to garner snaps at wide receiver. But OU is going to have 9 scholarship wideouts. And the reality is, in a Jeff Lebby offense, I don't think you're not going to be able to feed 9 mouths at the wide receiver position. It was theoretically possible in Lincoln Riley's scheme. I don't know that it is theoretically possible in Jeff Lebby's scheme. So I think you will see Marvin Mims garner a lot of targets. He will be the clearly defined wide receiver 1. And then the picture beyond that is somewhat unclear and somewhat murky. So to see which guys emerge opposite Marvin Mims at the wide receiver position and become significant contributors for Oklahoma in the passing game, I think is intriguing.
Yeah, you mentioned Jalil Farouk. Talk about him for a second, because I think a lot of people were saying he's transferring out because of Caleb Williams and the relationship that he had with him. What do you think one of the biggest reasons was that he stuck around at OU?
That's a great question. And I would love to ask Jalil Farouk that question. I'm sure that whenever he's made available to the media, that will be one of the first questions he has to field from reporters is, well, hey, you were best friends with Caleb Williams. Y'all came to Oklahoma together. You've been playing ball together since grade school. Why did you stay when he went? And I think for Jalil Farouk, it comes down to buying into the vision at Oklahoma and buying into the identity and the culture of the program. And that's not specific to one guy, right? That's not specific to Lincoln Riley. We've heard that reiterated time and again over the past few months, whether that's from Bob Stoops or Joe Castiglione or Brent Venables. Hey, this program is bigger than one person. And that's why Oklahoma football is going to be okay, even after Lincoln Riley's departure. And I think Jalil Farouk really has an opportunity to come into his own as a sophomore in Oklahoma's offense. And with the physical tools that he brings to the table, it's going to be really exciting to see what kind of an impact he can have for this offense.
You mentioned guys, that might be up close to the defensive line or on the defensive line. And two of the people that I'm really excited about is, in a biased way, Deshaun White. Me and Drew were kind of talking about it the other day. If you think of Brian Asamoah, you kind of have to think about Deshaun as well, kind of paint him in the same picture. And the other guy would be Jeffrey Johnson. What are your thoughts on Jeffrey? What do you think he can bring to the table? Because we all got to see what he did against us in the first game of the season last year. And I was just kind of wondering, what do you think he'll bring to us?
Yeah, well, I think the odds are that he starts right off the bat alongside Jalen Redmond at defensive tackle. When you look at the ball that Jeffrey Johnson's played and the good ball that he's played at the FBS level, you bring him in via the transfer portal with the expectation that he's going to start right away. Jeffrey Johnson is not the type of guy you're adding for depth. And so I think Oklahoma brought him in with the intention of making him a starter at defensive tackle if he proves worthy of that job. He's going to have to compete. Everybody is on Brent Venables' football team. Everybody's going to have to compete for what they're given. But Jeffrey Johnson, quite honestly, has a lot more physical ability than a lot of those guys he's going to be going up against for playing time. And so as long as he continues to make strides in the offseason, as long as he buys into the workout program under Jerry Schmidt, as long as he progresses, I think he's locked into a starting role alongside Jalen Redmond in 2022. And I think at that point, you have an Oklahoma defensive line that can wreak some havoc between those two, Jonah Laulu and Ethan Downs.
Yeah. You talked about a guy earlier, Danny Stutzman. We had his dad on a few weeks ago and was talking his recruitment and stuff like that. Where do you think a guy like him falls into that linebacker room and stuff like that? Because there's obviously high hopes. He's a fan favorite, things like that. What are you most excited to see out of our guy, Danny Stutzman?
Well, to be honest, I think Danny Stutzman had the opportunity to be an all Big 12 player by the end of the season had he not been derailed by that dislocated elbow. And I think that's how good he was proven to be very immediately for this Oklahoma defense. And now that he's going to get the opportunity to move into a full-time starting role, and now that he gets another offseason under his belt and he gets to be a part of Jerry Schmidt's workouts and he gets to distance himself even further from that elbow injury, man, I think the baseline expectation for Danny Stutzman is that he's going to crack the 100 tackle mark. I think that's almost a given as long as he stays healthy, because he's going to be a starter. He's going to fly all over the field. He's just got a nose for the football, man. And you've seen Brent Venables coach 4 Butkus Award winners over the years. I'm not saying Danny Stutzman is going to be the 5th. What I am saying is if he stays at Oklahoma all 4 years and doesn't jump to the NFL early, that's the kind of territory that he can broach by the time he's done at OU.
A Teddy Lehman, Rocky Kalmus type of player.
Absolutely. That's who he reminds me of.
Yeah, for sure. One guy that, and I know you talked about Javante Barnes in that running back room. Where do you think a guy like Gavin Sawchuk falls in line with that and his speed and the way he can, turn it on?
Yeah, Sawchuk's interesting. To me, I don't think he's as physically ready for the college game as Barnes. I worry a little bit more about his frame And so I think Sawchuk is a guy that you can probably pencil in for a bigger impact in 23 or 24 than right off the bat in 22. I think he's more of a I wouldn't call him a project. I don't think he's a guy that you need to fix before he's playing good ball. I think he's capable of playing good ball pretty immediately, but I do think he needs to pack on some additional weight and just adjust to the physical demands of the collegiate game before he's ready to reprise the role in the backfield that Eric Gray occupied this past year alongside Kennedy Brooks. To me, I think Javante Barnes is your next Kennedy Brooks. I think Gavin Sawchuk is your next Eric Gray. And I think those two guys complement each other very well. I'm excited to see what that backfield could look like 2-3 years down the road once those guys have the chance to come into their own.
You talked about Caden Helms, and as far as, solidifying himself and practicing and just doing everything right as of lately. One of the guys that I'm super stoked to see kind of get his shine, and I've been kind of putting on him as to have a big year, is Braden Willis. What are you thinking do you think he starts over Helms, has a great year? Do you think, obviously, like you've stated already, they're going to compete. It's always competing under Coach V, but what do you have him doing this upcoming year?
Yeah, look, it's very rarely that I will go out and say that I believe a true freshman is going to supplant an established veteran for a starting role. I've really only done it twice, and it was with Caleb Williams and it was with Billy Bowman at the nickel position. So in theory, yeah, I guess I'm 2 for 2 in that regard. But to me, with the advantage that Braden Willis has, just knowing the game and having been a part of that locker room and that culture for 4 seasons, I give him the edge to start over Helms. I do think Helms is one of those guys that might just prove too good to keep off the field at a certain point because he's the fastest, he's the most agile, he's the highest ceiling tight end that Oklahoma has. And so as long as there's not a significant adjustment period in terms of learning the playbook and in terms of adjusting from high school ball, and he played some high level high school ball in the state of Nebraska. His program up there, Bellevue West, is one of the state's elite, but there's still a stark difference between playing at Bellevue West High School and playing at the University of Oklahoma, right? And so that to me is where I want to see Caden Helms prove himself, because it depends in my eyes on how quickly he can get up to speed. If he can get up to speed immediately and there's no transition period required, that is a guy that can play a lot as a true freshman. I give Willis the edge to start, but again, I'm optimistic that Helms is going to be one of those guys by the end of the season that just proves too good to deny.
Yeah.
Talked about kind of how it's kind of hard to have, like under Lincoln's system, but for Levy's as far as wide receiver room. And the competition is super, super hard under a Levy's offense. What do you think about our guy, everybody's guy, Drake Stoops? Do you think he has a breakout year?
Well, it depends on your definition of a breakout year, because I think by definition, Drake Stoops is not a guy that's ever going to put up astronomical numbers in the statistical category, right? That's a guy that just does his role and does it very well. You'll hear the one thing that almost anybody that plays with Drake Stoops or coaches Drake Stoops or knows Drake Stoops will reiterate is that he knows football better than just about anybody. And he studies and works and hones his craft as devotedly as anybody. And so in my eyes, I don't think Drake Stoops is ever going to be an 80 catch, 1,000-yard, 10 touchdown type of guy. But I also don't think that's what he needs to be or even what he wants to be in Oklahoma's offense. He's a guy that's going to move the chains on third down. He's a guy that you're going to look for when you know you need yardage, a guy that you look for in late game situations where situational awareness comes into play and you have to be mindful of the clock. That's where Drake Stoops becomes very valuable to an offense. And I love the fact that Oklahoma has a guy like him in the wide receiver room, because I think he's so valuable and his value goes far beyond what you'll see in the box score.
Agreed. I think he's been one of those guys the last couple of years that you've seen make some clutch catches, those 3rd and longs, stuff like that. And I think he's just that glue guy in your offense that you need when you need a big play on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 to, run the clock out and take a knee and go to the house. So, yeah, I can't wait to see what Drake Stoops does in another year, especially, under, Jeff Lay and things like that. So
100%. Parker, I have one more question for you, and then we know you're limited on time. Where do you see this 2023 recruiting class going? Number 1, top 5, top 10?
I would say top 10. The ceiling is top 5. I think 2024 is where you look at Oklahoma potentially making a serious push for the number 1 recruiting class in the nation. I think that's a very legitimate possibility based on the movement that Oklahoma has already made with some of the elite players in that class. But as you look at 23, they're going to recruit really well. They're going to have a haul on the defensive line. I think they'll make some good progress in recruiting the offensive line as well. And I know that's an area in which many have been critical of Bill Bedenbaugh in recent years because they don't feel like he's recruiting up to his potential or the standard at Oklahoma. So I think to me, that is an area where Oklahoma is poised to take a big step up, is recruiting the defensive line, recruiting the offensive line. And what do we know about the SEC, right? As you prepare to make that transition, the play in the trenches becomes paramount. And so
100%.
that is an area where Oklahoma needs to be recruiting at elite level. And I think they will starting in 2023. I expect that they will be anywhere in that 4 to 7 range, I would think. And if you're any higher than that, awesome. That would be the best recruiting class that you put together in years and years. And if you're any worse than that, I wouldn't be concerned really, because in the era of the transfer portal, you're going to have guys that are chomping at the bit to come play at the University of Oklahoma. So it really is a win-win, however you slice it. But I do think with the guys that Oklahoma kind of has a red eye on right now on the recruiting trail, my expectation is that they'll be anywhere from 4 to 7.
Yeah. Especially if we go out and have some success this year on the field too, as well. That's just only going to boost recruiting for the next couple of years. And going into the SEC, guys are going to come play for Todd Bates, Brent Venables, and stuff like that, especially on the defensive side.
No, for sure. And the recruiting man himself, it's nice to hear that he expects us to be 4 to 7. So that's always fun to hear.
Yeah,
Parker, we do enjoy your time, brother. I know you got to run, so we won't take too much of your time. But if you ever want to come back on, you are more than welcome.
Yeah, guys, just hit me up anytime. We'll be more than happy.
For sure.
Hey, Parker, thanks so much for joining us, as always.
No problem, fellas. Take care.
Yes, sir. You too. That's been everything on the AnythingOU Podcast and the Chris and Drew Show. Really hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Parker Thune. It was really cool to kind of get in the mix of what the recruiting process is going like this upcoming year, and as far as people that just visited and his thoughts on what this upcoming seasons are going to look like, and as well as who he's excited for to see on the defense and offensive side of the ball. And that's all I have. Drew, you got anything you want to leave the people with?
Hey, April 23rd, spring game. I'll be there. Christian will be there. It's gonna be awesome, and I can't wait. I wish it was tomorrow, but we'll have to wait a couple more weeks. But as always, if you haven't, go look at the great merch they have over at hornsdownshop.com. Get some of that Deshaun White gear, that Bring the Boom shirt. We ain't done yet. All that swag over there. And as always, you already know, Boomer.
Sooner.